Hello, everybody, and welcome to Question and Answer Time number 23. I'm your host, Adam Neely. I'm here answering all of your questions about bass and music in general. So let's get started.
Question and Answer Time with Adam.
Hey Adam, what do you think of bass being used as a melodic device and for chords?
So I'm a little bit ambivalent about this. But it's not necessarily because bass is bad at playing melodies or bass is bad at playing chords. It's just that guitar and piano and other instruments might be that much better. Now, bass is a foundational instrument. Bass is a bass instrument, it's a rhythmic instrument. And so you subvert expectations by playing melodically or playing with chords. And that's great. That's an amazing artistic and musical tool to subvert expectations. But if you're always subverting expectations, you're just kind of trying to fill the role of the guitar player or the piano player. And so my question to you is, why don't you just play guitar or piano? They're just that much better at doing what you're trying to do. So keep that in mind. I am definitely not against it, and I strongly encourage bass players to try playing melodically and try playing with chords. But know that there's a balance there.
Well, I guess Nancarrow.
We're so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
That's actually one of my favorite comments I've ever gotten.
I love playing my bass and writing tunes. I also enjoy trying to get a deep understanding of what I'm playing on my instrument and listening to all kinds of music and playing it or trying to play it on my fretless. I think you have an overthinking approach that takes all the fun out of playing. Charlie Parker and Dizzy didn't sit around and talk about how ancient written music was not experienced like recorded music was. They just blew. I'm sure you're an excellent bass player and an exceptional composer, but I think you and other people like yourself are full of yourselves and look down on people who are not academic. You even point out that you won an award. I was looking for a couple of advanced bass lessons that are informative and fun. Lighten up, young man.
So I'm really interested in this comment, and I'm really fascinated by two things. The first thing is I really kind of want to dispel the notion that Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie did not know what they were doing and did not think about what they were doing when they were developing the bebop language of the 1940s, because it's kind of a tired and racist stereotype and trope, the trope of the magical Negro, the black jazz musician who just feels it, man, and does not really think about what he's doing, he just feels the music. I think that's just quite a dangerous idea to play into, and it's a very pervasive trope and idea in a lot of jazz music and a lot of music education. Of course, Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and a lot of those other musicians from that era were talking about it. They were talking the same language of Debussy and Stravinsky and Beethoven and Mozart, and also all of the Creole jazz musicians of proto-jazz and ragtime of the earlier part of the 20th century. It's also pretty interesting that you found that video, The Art of the Written Score, to be too intellectual or too eggheady, because I've posted that video in r/music theory and in several Facebook groups. It's been accused of being anti-intellectual tripe. People decide that they want to paint a picture of whatever villain and whatever enemy they want on my face because I'm taking that tone and not necessarily worry about the content of the video.
So you shouldn't use tabs because it's slower to read? You do realize that it's only useful for musicians who need to actually read while performing, right? What about all the musicians who have no intention of ever needing to do so at all? And don't come around with that professional musicians elitist crap. That's just disgusting.
So you actually kind of hit the nail on the head right there with the controversy surrounding that video, why you shouldn't use tab. I don't actually think that you shouldn't use tab. That was a very clickbaity title, my mistake. There are plenty of instances where you should use tab and it's better, etc., etc. But if you're trying to read music quickly, and if you're just trying to sight read it and just trying to play it at a high professional level, I know that's disgusting. Standard notation is far superior. There's a million reasons why that might be, and I explained it all in the tab video, but a lot of people just decided that they didn't want to think about those reasons, and they came up with their own reasons, like tab's better because it's easier. That's fine, guys, it is, but I was trying to explain some other things, why standard notation might be better in the long run.
What kind of cameras are you running?
For the gig vlogs, I just use my iPhone, honestly, and sometimes a GoPro. It's so difficult to run multiple camera angles and play music at the same time. It just requires a very different sort of segmenting of my brain. So I try and keep it as simple as possible, usually, for those gig vlogs. I have a couple more coming up, so definitely stay tuned for those.
Hey Adam, what makes a Christmas song, well, a Christmas song? How come you hear a song and say, yep, that's a Christmas song? Is it the key or mode or chord progression or a certain scale or riff? I don't know.
Honestly, it's just the lyrics. There's no like theoretical concept. I mean, music is pumped through speakers in every public place from October to the end of December. Through a lifetime of that, we just have it ingrained in our heads for these particular songs, whether or not we remember the songs or not, that this means that it's Christmas time. And that's really the only thing that makes a Christmas song. That and maybe the presence of sleigh bells. That's the only musical thing besides the lyrics.
I really want to enjoy this type of music, but I can't get get over how weird it is, so it just sounds bad to me. I can appreciate the musicianship that went behind it, but I still find it hard to appreciate the music itself. Maybe I just need to get used to it?
That's totally fine. You're totally allowed to not like my music. Especially if you don't really like prog rock or jazz or electronic music or whatever. I like to think about listening to music on multiple levels, on multiple regions of your brain. You can listen to music from the visceral level, from the emotional level, from whether or not you want to just put it on, or like the functional level. Does this music make me want to dance? Is this music to cry to? And then you can also listen to music based upon whether or not you think a person has achieved their goal, and trying to understand what that goal is, and then make aesthetic judgments based upon how successful a person was at their goal. And that's a little bit more of a cerebral, intellectual level. Try and think about that whenever you're listening to music. You can still hate what I do, though. That's totally fine.
My problem with the music industry is that there are too many people looking for music jobs, and there are too few jobs. When I search monster.com for any music-related job, the first result is always Uber driver. Everyone wants to be an artist, so even if I had the connections to get a job I want, I can be paid less than my time is worth, because a million other people are willing to do it for much less or free.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you. I mean, music is an incredibly difficult career just because it is so oversaturated in terms of people trying to make a living, and everybody is hyper qualified, you know, in terms of their degrees and everything. A lot of it is kind of almost a war of attrition. Like, can you outlast everybody else? I'm in my late 20s right now, and I see already a fair number of people who graduated college with me stop doing music because they just don't want to deal with the incredibly stressful nature of this career. And I don't blame them. When they tell me that, I'm like, oh, clearly, yeah, duh, I totally don't blame you. Go, you know, live a reasonable life. I never really want to sugarcoat this. It is very difficult. It is also worth it. It is definitely worth it, but you have to understand that this is a pretty significantly different lifestyle than many other sorts of careers that you might necessarily have.
Hey Adam, great stuff. Enjoy the videos. Keep them coming. Do you work much in the studio? Recording sessions? I see you speak a lot about gigging and other aspects of the music world, but not much on recording.
So yeah, I don't really spend much time in the recording studio because honestly, there's not that much of a recording studio scene here in New York City. It's all dying quite quickly, actually, which is kind of sad. I mean, everybody I know kind of has their own home studio setups, and for most sorts of things, that's what people do, is they work kind of remotely with their home studios. I do a little bit of that, but not that much. From what I can tell, more of the recording stuff still exists in LA, from definitely not so much in New York City. I know a fair number of people who moved out to the West Coast from New York, and that seems like where a lot of people are starting to go if they feel like too jaded by the New York City and the New York scene. They go to the greener pastures on the West Coast, but I know there's a lot of problems with LA too, so it really just depends on what you want to do.
I have a question. I'm a guitarist primarily when I'm playing in bands, but I'm looking to pick up the bass. Is there any shame for showing up to a respectable/professional gig with a short scale bass? Also, do 5-string short scale basses exist? Thanks, and respect for a dope name. Haha.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about getting vibed in professional situations for bringing a short scale. Most people really don't care, much less notice that you're playing a short scale. I mean, there's people like Drew of the Drew who play a short scale bass, and he absolutely shreds on it, and it sounds awesome. And 5-string short scale basses definitely do exist, but for me, that low B string feels way too floppy. Honestly, on a 34-inch scale 5-string, most B strings feel way too floppy for me. I mean, there's a reason why 34-inch scale basses are the norm. It just feels more physically, you feel more physically connected. It feels like it's a more visceral experience, especially if you have a 5-string. And whenever you're playing those shorter scale basses, it's fine, it's great, and they might be easier to play and you might be able to shred, but you don't have the same sort of connection to it that you might have on the longer scale instruments. For me personally, anyway.
I recently obtained a Misa Tribass because I wanted an interesting MIDI controller that would spice up my live performances. Plan on hooking it up to my computer to play synth bass live while also performing vocals. I've never played bass guitar before, but playing this instrument makes me incredibly hopeful that the bass guitar is just as fun as playing the Tribass. I'm just curious what you think about instruments like this. Do you see yourself playing and/or owning one, or would you consider it blasphemous to be in the same room as it? Love from Saskatchewan, Luca.
I definitely don't think of the Misa Tribass as being anything like a bass guitar. And if you haven't played bass guitar, don't go into it expecting that it will sound or feel anything like a Tribass. It is a completely different thing. I do know that like Chris Wolstenholme, the bass player from Muse, plays it on that track Madness live, and when I first saw that, I thought that was so cool. And yeah, I think it's really expressive and a cool tool for a lot of people, but it's not a bass guitar. It's definitely not a bass guitar.
Hey man, have you checked out the new Animals as Leaders album yet?
Yeah, I definitely checked out Animals as Leaders' latest album. It's really cool, especially that first track, Arithmophobia? Yeah, where that synth sitar comes in, and I'm like, stuff is about to go down when I first heard that, and stuff went down, and it was great. I kind of liked actually The Joy of Motion a little bit better, Matt Garska's first album with the band, but this album was really, really cool, and I hope to check them out soon live. I haven't done that yet.
Awesome, just a tiny nitpick. This is relevant to DJs who don't play mashups as well. A good way to define a mashup is a mix where the audience actually recognizes both songs and recognizes the fact that they're mixed together. However, when I, for example, play a techno set, I usually don't expect the audience to know the tracks that I'm playing. And yet, I still try to match the keys and chord progressions of tracks I put together. Also, Lafroy got the royal stamp in the early 90s, so Stravinsky would have been drinking the bottle without the Prince of Wales stamp.
So 2 things. Yeah, no, I mean, I know DJs do that all the time, pair different songs together and try and seamlessly mash up the end of one song into the beginning of the next and mix and match elements, and that's a big part of mixing live. And I know that, and I really respect DJs who can do that well. A lot of the time, you know, maybe musicians might look down on DJs because they're just pressing play, but there's a lot of skill and craft into it, and so thank you for bringing that up. Also, really interesting tidbit with the Lafroig, I did not know that, so thank you for correcting that part of the video.
I think that a great analogy for this is hiragana, phonetic characters, versus kanji, pictograms in the Japanese language. Little kids can only read hiragana, but once you've learned the kanji characters, it's much easier to read words written with kanji because the meaning, not the pronunciation, is directly represented by the character.
That's a really interesting analogy, and thank you for bringing that up. I don't really know a whole lot about Japanese or Japanese characters, so I can't really comment intelligently on this. But that's really the point that I was making a lot in that tab video, is that, you know, tab is a great way of showing you how to play something, and standard notation is showing what that thing is.
Hello, Adam. I'm only 13 and I'm starting to get into jazz, but I'm concerned that it is dying out and there will be very little or none in 20-odd years' time, and there will be very hard for any jazz musicians to get a job.
But here's the thing. Jazz musicians never start a career in jazz to make money. They do it for the love of the music and for the intellectual and artistic creativity. That's great, and that's pretty much always the way it's been. It's the way it is now. It will be in the future. You don't get a job in jazz. That doesn't exist. Musicians have to be entrepreneurs. You have to have a means of developing multiple streams of income from different locations, and you have to kind of think of yourself as a one-man business for yourself. I don't see that aspect ever changing. Now, where those streams of income come from, well, that might change quite significantly in the future. But in terms of how you think of yourself, don't think of there as being a jazz job. If you're thinking about it that way, that's not what a musician is.
Have you ever played with French horn players in gigs? I know it's not common, but just curious to know if you had and what the experience was like.
I have not played with any French horn players. That is an exceptionally rare instrument on the bandstand outside of classical music. I know it's possible, and I have heard of French horn players, but they're definitely, at least to my knowledge, no really big French horn players on the New York scene right now. So shout out to the French horn players. Come to New York and come jam with us, because that would be awesome.
I am unimpressed with higher education most of the time. I'm impressed with a select few people, and referencing Vsauce gives me hope that you could choose to be the next innovation in music conceptualization. You seem to have the drive, and your face will likely do if you play it right. You surely have the presence, less the tendencies towards narcissism. I get it, you're making a name for yourself. Pay closer attention to your mentors that matter. They find power in being humble without being stepped upon. It's a fine line that you seem to understand. Higher IQ is tough to find without the caveats of idiosyncratic indigestion. If you entered a wind tunnel, you would be streamlined enough to make change. Just keep it objective, and all will wind out your way. Music need a kind of Bill Nye, the science guy. I think you could be it.
I just wanted to share that comment with you guys, because I really got a kick out of this particular comment.
Man, I really appreciate your work out there. Not so many jazz/pop musicians, at least those who I know in person, know so much about the history of /classical music. So does the classical musicians with modern music knowledge. In my opinion, mashing up, those two subjects helps each other understanding many, many things. 3, 2, 1, here comes the question. How the music schools, middle/high schools, in US look like with an education? Do they teach about classical music masulti, or do they focus on American history of music? Also, where did you went?
So that's interesting, because I might have a different opinion on this than you. Because here in the United States, in music education, you're required to know a lot about classical musical history. In my undergraduate, I had to take 2 semesters of music history, and that was, of course, classical Western music history. And that was fine, and that's great, and I learned a lot. Jazz musicians, rock musicians, and any kind of other musicians besides classical musicians leaving higher education in music usually have a pretty strong foundation in classical theory and classical history. Probably not so much the other way around. You know, we definitely have a strong understanding and appreciation of Beethoven and Brahms and Debussy and Bach. But do classical musicians graduating from the same system have a strong understanding of, say, John Coltrane, Jelly Roll Morton, Duke Ellington, in terms of having a strong understanding of the cultural importance of those musicians, and also what they did musically and why and how and what sort of impact they had? Probably not. They didn't study any of that with the same sort of intellectual and historical rigor, they're other important figures for the kinds of music that we play these days, especially the music of the past 100 years, and that's important to have that sort of understanding also.
Mifwa Kesha becomes an emotional experience.
Kesha is always an emotional experience.
Great video as always. You should put a mashup in its own video because I thought it was awesome. I have a bass question. What do you think of the adage, tone is in your hands, not in your gear? I understand why someone would say this, but I think saying it is misleading. I think that the tone is in the whole system. Your bass technique, what gear you own, what you know about, and how you use it as a result.
I know I've talked about this before, but the idea that the tone is in your hands is important from a psychological standpoint rather than a literal standpoint. Because yes, gear matters quite significantly in the long run in signal chain and, all sorts of things, but the people that obsess over gear kind of forget to understand that you need to have a very deliberate technique and a deliberate approach to the instrument in order to get as much tone and sound from it as possible. It's definitely possible for an absolute master of the instrument to sound good on any piece of gear, but it's very difficult for somebody who hasn't mastered the instrument to make any piece of gear sound good. So I think it's more important to focus on getting a really strong focused tone with your hands than anything else. But yeah, not literally. It's definitely not literally the tone is in the hands, but it's most important for your focus.
This gigs are pure bullshit. As a training musician, that's not what I want to do in my life.
That's totally fine. You might not necessarily want to play weddings as a professional musician. I like them. They're a lot of fun, very high energy. I get to play a lot of notes and practice on my bass, do all sorts of fun stuff, and really good time with good people. The music might not necessarily be the most artistically engaging, and for you, that might be a non-starter. You do not want to do that. And instead, you want to focus on what you want to do artistically and creatively, and that you want to make your life, and that's great. You got to have a day job though. You sometimes have to do things that you might not want to do in order to do the thing that you want to do. That's just a general life lesson for you, but think about that.
Sorry, I know I'm asking the same question a couple other people are wondering about. What effects are you using? It does sound a lot like a keyboard, 113 and 310, very heavy bass tone that sounds really awesome. Maybe you're playing chords? Thanks you for sharing all your videos.
I've said this before and I'll say it again. As a bass player, your most important pedal is the octave pedal, because it makes the difference between sounding, oh, that sounds pretty cool, it's a bass, and oh my God, what's happening right now? It can thicken up the sound so much if you use it in the right sorts of places, and that's all it was, just an octave pedal.
So Ableton Live is regarded as a useful software for live performance, but what are your thoughts about it as a tool for composition and production?
I definitely like Ableton Live as a production tool. As a recording tool, if you're trying to record a band, it's miserable because it doesn't have any ability to do takes. It's really clunky for that. I really dislike it for that sort of thing, like trying to record. But once you have everything recorded, it's a great production tool because it's very intuitive. Automation is a breeze. And there's all sorts of neat little tricks in it that just make life a lot easier for MIDI routing and all sorts of fancy stuff. So for live applications and for production and composing, it's fantastic. For recording, not so much.
I'm almost done with my degree. You're making me wish I had studied something else. Is the music industry really declining that fast? That's so sad.
And that's one of those things, all these people graduating from music programs, there's so many of them. They don't have any sort of frame of reference for what it's like to make a living in the real world. And that's kind of a shame. These programs do very little to develop those sorts of skills and give that sort of understanding to their students. I understand why, because a lot of the time those professors just don't have those skills anymore because they've been in the academic ivory tower for so long. But it's also kind of a shame because it's very necessary and it's a very dynamic industry and it's a changing industry, and the kinds of skills that you need in order to succeed are very specific and they change quickly. Berklee does a pretty decent job of attempting that, but Berklee is its own bubble in a lot of cases because it's just its own thing. And other technical schools are pretty decent at least giving students the skills for that, but for the most part, it's kind of this almost willful ignorance, which is kind of a shame.
I would strongly disagree with purely sonic arguments for emotion in music. We have to remember that our associations are cultural, not natural. Other music cultures do not hear the same emotions, which themselves are not agreed upon until recently. Old modes were associated with emotions different from what we now hear them as.
Yeah, normally I am kind of a fan of a relativistic understanding of music and culture in general, but in this case there is some sort of scientific influence on all of this and some sort of basis across all cultures in terms of how we react to certain sounds. Now, there is something called enculturation, in which infants will learn certain patterns in the culture that they find themselves in, which they were born to. They'll be drawn to certain rhythms and certain sounds, but at the same time, there's kind of a universal constant in music, and that is the harmonic series. And I didn't talk about the harmonic series at all in that Why is Major Happy video, and I probably should have, but it wasn't really confirming or dealing with anything that I was talking about in terms of my music theory hypothesis, but at the same time, across all cultures, the harmonic series has a very important role to play, and we are very intensely drawn to particular sounds in the harmonic series, like, for example, the major third and the perfect fifth. And also the pentatonic scale. Bobby McFerrin has this great video, and I'm gonna link it to it in the description, where he kind of proves the universality of the major pentatonic scale and how all cultures are drawn to this particular scale no matter what. I think that's really interesting. Now, whether or not the emotions tied to that particular scale are the same across all cultures, maybe not historically, but certainly in this globalized, homogenized era of music and the world, there's been some sort of consolidation for sure.
Hi Adam, I'm strongly considering creating a channel of the same ilk as yours, partly on your recommendation from a previous Q&A. Was wondering what, if anything, you did to drive views to your channel, or is your channel's success just a symptom of the rise in popularity of more heady content? Cheers.
My biggest suggestion to you is a suggestion that I heard from somewhere, and I'm gonna suggest it again. Always be uploading content no matter what, and try and make that content as good content as you possibly can. Try and tag as much as you can. I'd use a lot of tags. I definitely did in the beginning. I also posted a lot to Reddit and Talkbase. Also spam the hell out of your videos on social media. That's kind of all I really did. I guess maybe there's a tend toward intellectual heady content, maybe, but I guess that's just sort of a desire to have quality content. I think it's really just the desire to have something good to watch or good to listen to. So I suggest go for it and always be uploading something.
There's this band called Stimpy Lockjaw, and God, I have no idea of what they're doing, but it's awesome. BTW, great videos, they really inspire me to keep going with music. A bass player from Mexico.
First of all, it's Stimpy Lockjaw, and I love Stimpy Lockjaw. I'm a little bit biased because I know the keyboard player. I've played with him a couple times in a couple different situations. It's kind of funny, the band name, he told me, was just like one of those random band name generators, and Stimpy Lockjaw it was. And that band is fantastic. It's like progressive metal stuff, but it's very different from other prog metal stuff because they really take their time in that band to develop an idea. And it's like, it feels by the end of one of, I think, God, I don't know the names of any of the songs, but at the end of these like expansive, massive epics, it's just like, feels like you really have explored compositionally this particular idea, and it's really, really fascinating, the music. Definitely check out their album, Stimpy Lockjaw. Yeah. So that's it. That's my Q&A number 23. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Adam Neely. If you like what I do, please consider commenting, please consider liking, and please consider subscribing. And also please consider clicking that little ringy button next to the subscribe button that gives you notifications for whenever I post something new. And generally it's going to be on Mondays, because I post every Monday afternoon, and I've been doing that for 1.5 years now, and I'm going to not stop now. I'm going to keep it up, that content, yeah. Also consider joining my Patreon, because I also post additional bonus content to my Patreon, and these guys below are my Patreon subscribers, so thank you so much if you're a Patreon subscriber. And yeah, until next time, peace.